Hi Guy, welcome to episode 3 of the AMIGArama podcast. Before we jump right in, I thought we'd have a look at a bit of recent news that's just come to light. You may be aware of this, but a couple of fans have come together with AMIGAstore.eu to include in the Amiga a recently recoded or created game called Retro Wars. Now, basically, this is a point-and-click style adventure. It's all side-on view. For the purpose of copyright, they've not called it Star Wars and such, but it includes all the characters. The shots so far, it's from the original Star Wars film, and I'm assuming it's following the story. There's not too much detail on that front, but the guys who did it, guys called AMIGAwave, well, they also did another Amiga game called Furtum Sacrum. That's a very odd title. Now, they usually just deal in Spanish games, but in this case, they've just said that an English version is going to be available for free as a download on the 6th of November. Now, I might cover this in a later episode, assuming it is free and I can get my hands on the file properly. But from looking at the details of it, you know, it's in nice, glorious 32 colours, inventories. It says music in game. Hang on, any Amiga with 1 meg of RAM with at least 512 kilobytes of chip, so that's going to be just perfect to play. It's interesting new titles coming out, especially as back in the day we just never got a Star Wars game point and click title. Now the next thing I've been looking at, you're probably sort of aware of these, especially if you're in the whole Amiga scene, but there's a website called cd32covers.blogspot.co.uk. Basically focuses on CD32 games, which shouldn't be a problem if you're using some sort of emulator. But they do work perfectly on the console, and every so often they release these compilation of like classic games. Now the CD32 is basically an A1200 in a box, so a lot of the titles aren't really backwards compatible to some degree, so you will most likely need an emulator. But in this case, they've just released on the 1st of November a compilation by Vision. So this is the complete Amiga works, and these are a New Zealand company. And just looking through the list of games that they actually did, this is quite impressive. There was 11 titles. First up was Cybernetics. Then Gnome, King's Quest, I had no idea, that's quite interesting to learn. Microbes, Overkill CD32, Roadkill CD32, now that's quite an interesting game. Seek and Destroy, that's CD32 as well. Sorcerer's Apprentice, I have no idea what that one is. Woody's World, and Zombie Apocalypse 1 and 2, with the second one being the AGA game. Now, this site has been going for several years now. I think this is about their 30th release, but it's just interesting. I mean, I had a CD32 about 18 months ago. I kept it for a while. It was alright as a console, but it was a bit too basic. It wasn't a full-on 1200. And at the time, it was quite interesting because it had a broken CD drive inside it, and I actually bought a third-party one off eBay, and then I did a bit of an installation and ripped it to shreds. It took me several weeks, actually, because I wasn't too au fait with doing that sort of thing with these consoles, but I got it working eventually, cleaned up the insides and put some stuff in, and it was a neat little console, but I didn't like the controller. This is actually the main reason why I've got that PS2 adapter, which I actually use with my PS3, with my Amiga and other systems. So, you know, it does have a good effect. But yeah, we'll come back to the CD32 another time, an entertaining console, to say the least. Let's move on to the meat of the episode. This week I've decided to pick a title that really stood out to me back in the day. I was really driven up towards buying it. It was got lots of footage in different magazines. The reviews were middling to, well, I'd say a bit higher than that, probably averaged to about 85%. But I played a couple of demos of it, and I think it really drew me in at the time. And I was a teenager. It was a dark and brooding game, and it really just it got that itch, as it were. So I couldn't wait to play it. But as a title, I mean, Dreamweb is basically, it's a point and click, but it's top down based. I mean, even at the time, it reminded me of the Ultima games, probably 6 and maybe 7. That top down, slightly at an angle view with it, very different graphics, very 3D styled and interactive, and it had a fantastic way of making that world come alive on the screen. Now, the cover of the box helped add to this mystery, especially with what came inside, but you had this huge eye looking out over a cityscape, dark and gritty, big tall towers, orange sunset going on and everything, and it's just this single eye in the middle, and the glorious artwork that made the title stand out. And I don't think Empire Interactive made many games beyond this, but it certainly was a highlight at the time for me. Now, I have got a copy of the manual, and to make this episode make sense, I thought we'd have a look at this, but I'll just read out the introduction. And this is what you first get when you open it. It says, "In your dreams, you travel to the Dreamweb. Everyone does. The plane of subconsciousness affects your everyday life. It controls the very heart of civilization itself. This web is controlled by 7 people who each contain the power of a node within the web. The characteristics of these people imbue the web and hence the world with their own strengths and weaknesses. As one of the nodes dies, it is transferred to another human, and so the forces within the web fluctuate as the nodes attain differing aspects. But this is about to be shattered. The forces of evil have understood the power of the web, and now all 7 nodes are controlled by evil people. The web itself is about to be overrun and destined to remain evil forever. Only one person can stop this terrible catastrophe, the chosen one, Ryan. You've been summoned by the keepers of the web. You must destroy the controllers of all 7 nodes to allow the web to regenerate and thus restore the equilibrium. The fate of civilization rests in your hands. Good luck." Now, from that straight away, it just sounds like your typical manual opening introduction. And I will admit, it does not give you an idea of the story you're about to get into or what's involved. But one of the extra things included with the manual, no, don't worry, I'm not going to read the entire thing out. It's basically something called Diary of a Madman, ? And it's all a handwritten document, and it basically goes through different days of the guy's life. And I mean, the whole game is based around this really dark story where you're never entirely sure if the main character Ryan is actually insane, if he's making all this up, and it's, it's just a fantasy in his head. I mean, the story on that aspect of it always remembers me of that film, the book American Psycho, where you're never quite sure what's true and what isn't. And as a game and as a story, the way it pulls it all together, and you never really get a straight answer for that, no matter how long you play it for. But yeah, I mean, going over to this Diary of a Madman, the main story there doesn't set the scene. When you first boot the game up, you get a pretty good introduction, full graphics and everything, and of all this coming together and how Ryan exists in his world. But the Diary of a Madman, these really fantastic handwritten entries, but I've just picked one at random, here we go. 12:15 a.m. I'm sane for the moment. As sane as I get, that is. These boots of sanity don't last long, so I'll write fast while I sit still, whilst I still have my marbles. You'll have to put it because it's handwritten, there's big cross marks in it. I went out 3, maybe 4 hours ago. I must have eaten. My stomach feels full. Enough of that. I went to the church to St. Septimus. Whilst I was climbing the Italian steps, I heard following footsteps. Didn't take any notice at first. No reason to. Then I stumbled over a step. The footfall stopped. I looked back into the dark. The dark was too dark. Good God. It hid whoever was there. I carried on. The tracking footsteps started again. I stopped. They stopped. I continued on. They followed. Just like in the movies. Now, that's just one little snippet of this diary. This diary is about 40 pages long. Sorry, these are only like 12 pages, but the whole thing is packed with stuff like this. And as you go further and further into the diary, it's a visual thing, but the handwriting gets more drawn out. The comments become crazier and crazier until you get right to the end of the diary, and it's all like big, huge letters filling most of the most of the page in the book, and with things like, I renounce everything. I'll burn my books. Eden, I'm falling. I think that's his girlfriend. Anyway, falling asleep. Dreamweb. And big blotch of ink marks. My name is Ryan. I am the deliverer. I am an executioner. Hunter of the Seven. It's like killing Hitler. And that's where you start off in the game with him, his mind obviously deteriorating, and then it's up to you to try and work out, you know, is this actually happening? And what are you doing that's wrong and right? It sounds, I'm stretching this out a bit, but it's the most interesting story I've ever seen from an Amiga game, and it caught my interest at the time. I mean, as a whole, the whole thing is absolutely packed. It was very adult. I mean, if it was censored heavily, I think in Australia, most things seem to be these days, but even at the time, it was packed full of violence, lots of blood and guts and nudity, and, you know, there's bits of like, I'll get to it in a sec, but like you'll see his girlfriend just in the bath, you know, in the nude. And in some versions of the games, it was censored, but it wasn't in the UK one. I mean, the graphics they're not amazing, so it's obvious to work out what it was, but it was probably a bit of a fuss about nothing, to be honest. But moving on, just to give you an idea of the story and the way it works with the game, a big part of it, you have to murder the Seven. Because you're effectively, you know, I mean, you're playing as a serial killer. That's not something common in games. And you work your way through this hotel. It's point and click, so you have to solve puzzles, and it's usually simple stuff like, you know, get a key card for a door, you know, move stuff about, that sort of thing. But you get into this main room, so you work your way up through the hotel, you've got past the guards, the bodyguards, because this person is quite famous. And as you go into, like, it's a bedroom setup, and you see a hooker actually humping this guy on the bed. And then as you walk in, she screams and scrambles off the bed, you know, don't kill me sort of thing, and to go underneath. And you have to quickly, like, pull out your gun and you shoot the guy. And when you actually shoot the game, there's no, like, censor bar or it stops or anything like that. It actually shows the brains being blown out. And even going back to it today, I was thinking, my God, that's pretty graphic, especially for the time, and I can understand why there was such a response to it. But at the same time, you know, it's rather cartoony violence. It looks a bit, you know, that Acme style, a bit, lots of blood, lots of guts. It's very, very ketchupy. But after he shot his brains, it's basically the Dreamweb, the story part comes out, and it's like a little glowing blue ball that swirls around the room, and then it hits you and pulls you back into the web. And all the murders are like this. They're all over the top, really uber gory violence, but it's very cartoony, and it's not like that sort of, you know, it makes you feel ill, or it's gross in that sort of sickening way. But it's really, really interesting in the way they spin off it in different ways to link it into the story, and you're never quite sure, is this guy insane? Is he not? And will the story actually reveal it to you? Now, you might be thinking, well, if you're covering the entire game, why don't you talk about the story? Because I won't, and I refuse to. It's because it's really worth going back to this, if alone, even if you don't like point and clicks, just to experience that world and that atmosphere. So I'm not going to put any spoilers in or anything, guys. So you're all right if you're planning on playing it after this episode. Now, it's all very well set in a good environment and being dark and drawing you into this world, but the one thing something like that needs to make it all work together is good sound effects, really good music, and the game as a whole really does something special there. Now, sadly, most of it's loot. I mean, it is on a floppy disk after all, and it's a tech of the time, and it's very limited in that sense. But what they have actually done, they've mixed it in with like environmental sounds, like when you go outside, it's always raining, and it's got that very, not just the look, like the neon look and the very dark, damp, futuristic side of it, but this music that plays throughout really makes you feel depressed. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it really does help set the mood and draw you into what's going on around it. I mean, it creates this, it's like a brooding atmosphere. Well, I mean, for me at the time as a teenager, I'm sure, it was absolutely perfect because you're going through this period of growth and changing and all the rest of it, and the world sucks and all that. I'm probably still a bit like that to this day, and it's over 20 years later. But at the time, it did just have that appeal to me, and I knew similar people who played it and really enjoyed. Well, I think they probably didn't enjoy it. They just got on with it well. One of the really interesting things it does is that the whole game world, pretty much everything within it can be interacted with, whether it's clothes on the floor, things on a counter, stuff on the counter. I mean, you start the main game in Ryan's apartment, and you can pretty much mess with anything from the alarm clock to the net terminal to stuff like that, and it really does help create an interactive world. And I did compare it to Ultima earlier on. I mean, particularly in Ultima 7, because you could pretty much do the same there, and it must have been something in the air at that time when these games were all coming out. But it works incredibly well, which it also is a detriment to the game, which I'll explain a bit later on. But they're helping to build that environment where you don't know what you're doing, you're not sure if you're sane or sane, and everything feels like that you're driving towards a goal. You don't really know what's going on, but it's stuff like that really makes you question. You mean, you're like in other games, you find and pick things up, and in a way it can be a positive because it feels like I might need that, I might not do that, and it makes you feel anxious, and in a way that anxiousness adds to that sense of, well, insanity which is placed on you throughout the entire game. Now, I did mention there briefly, but there is like a net terminal that you can interface with, and I think you need a code for it later on in the game, or sorry, a password to like a code. That's probably the wrong word for it. I mean, I think the password is placed in I think it's in the back of the Diary of a Madman. It's like a form of copyright, because back in the day there was no web or anything. I mean, one of the problems I had with this game back then is I never actually managed to complete it because I had next to no solutions in magazines or anything. There was no internet, typical stuff. You just had no solution, so you're completely stuck with what you've got. And if you'd have got a copy of Dreamweb, you'd have been buggered, because, I mean, at the back of this the back of the diary, you had like codes for the door, things for like, I think it was when the garbage is collected, his girlfriend's birthday, all like important things that happen throughout the game where if you don't know the answer to, you can't guess. I mean, just imagine trying to guess like a door code. I mean, even if it's like 9,000 and odd digits long, that's still sitting there going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 3, over and over again. So it was quite a clever way of doing it, but then putting in a section in the attachment. So it made sure you had to actually buy a copy. Now, the net side of it, there wasn't much to it. It was very basic. You were basically looking at a black terminal screen with orange text. But for me at the time, it always seemed to remind me of the Alien movies and when they were using the terminals, and it was very basic and you could select your way through. But it added a whole bunch to the story because it would tell you background and stuff and things that were going on in the world, and created this whole situation where you felt it wasn't just you solving a few. But that was the problem with a lot of point and clicks back in the day. It just felt like you were solving a couple of problems, get through onto the next one and keep going. This one added in turn to the actual environment, and it really helped build it up around you as a powerful character. And I did mention the rain before, but the great thing about it is when you're walking about outside and the rain is just powdering down completely, and it's really pushing, and it just creates this sense of like really powerful themes that there's something going on in the world which is more than you are, and makes you a much more involved I'm getting a bit lost there. It's really hard to describe this because, as I said, it does have all these themes and really dark and damp and gritty, and it's very similar to Blade Runner. It's got that sort of environment and it's a miserable world, but it encompasses you completely and it really does involve you. Now, of course, it's not a perfect game and it does have lots of flaws. I have listed a few out because, of course, for the episode, I have to play these as much as possible. I'm afraid I've not done a complete playthrough today, but I did do one in the last couple of years, so I'm very familiar with the story. One of the things I said it before, it can help the game with having lots and lots of items and things to interact with. At the same time, that does create a bit of a problem because it's quite a big game. You're roaming about various different parts of the city, and a lot of it you can travel between like taxis, so there is some sort of like a basic fast travel in a way. But the problem is if you're in point F and you get stuck in a bit and you need something, you might have left that back in your apartment, so you've got to travel literally all the way back. But at the same time, it's never really spelt out that you need this item. It's not like, say, you get in something like Monkey Island or Day of the Tentacle and you pick a specific object. You'll have some red herrings, but there's always a clever hint, or they'll get rid of them or clear it out at some point. So you never constantly clogged down with inventory, but this doesn't have anything like that. So if you pick up something like a book in the beginning, you think it looks sort of important, it might come in use. It probably never will be. But the thing is, you've got that sat in your inventory taking up a slot, and unless you've got a solution or know the way through, you're stuck with it for most of the game, and it really doesn't help you get through sections, which is a shame. And this also ties in with another problem I had is the dialogue that you face with using a graphic adventure. You'll get a choice of like A, B, C, D, E, and a like text answers you can come back with. But in this, it's just your character has full paragraphs of text on the screen. It's the same with the inventory. Both of them, when it flicks over to them, it completely fills the screen. Now, this is another problem with them because the actual screen side, it's probably half of your screen that you're actually looking at, and then it's got an environment going around the edges, which is sort of okay, but you do wish sometimes they would have stretched it out a bit more to fill a lot more of the screen. But the problem is when you're talking to people, having to go in your inventory to use stuff, and this is even during big action sequences where you need to get something out really quick or do something, and then it just pulls, like one part I mentioned where you need to shoot someone with a gun. You have to go in your inventory, pull the gun out, use the gun, and then it'll use it on the person. But to do that, it takes you away onto a separate menu which covers the screen. You can't see anything. And then you do like with a graphic adventure, you've got all the icons at the bottom, and you can use it at the same time, and it all just sort of works a lot better. But because of this, and because of the way the menus work, and there's too many things to pick up, it can be very, very easy to miss items, which is a real must, and you get stuck in the whole backtracking. And yes, I did say there is a sort of fast travel to it, but the problem is if you've gone through a section, you've gone right to the back of, say, a building, the problem is in order to get out of the building to go back somewhere to explore, you have to walk all that way with the mini fast travel part in the middle. So it doesn't help. Now, the puzzles as a whole, this is another sort of a problem. They're quite mundane. I mean, like I said before, there's things like key codes for the door, and I know these are the copyright part of it, but lots of things are like this. It's picking up very, very simple items and using them, and there's not very complicated puzzles to solve. But the problem is because you're inundated with a big chunk of items, it can be more of more of an issue to work out what you actually need. And because of the way the game is designed and you see the world, you're not 100% sure what's actually going on, and there's no sort of hints. And even though most things you might be able to work out if you read the text and the talk very, very, very carefully, and it's almost taking notes to that degree. It's a shame, really, because it for what it is as a game, it's very, very clunky in parts because of that, and it really does struggle to become anything special. Now, on the whole, you're probably thinking, I've been incredibly down on it as a game, and yes, I mean, personally, I quite like it. I think there's something very, very special here. The story is certainly worth more than the sum of its parts. It's very clunky, has a lot of issues, but it's certainly worth pushing through just to see that whole world and the way it's laid out and how interactive it all is. And, you know, you've got to remember this is the mid-90s. This sort of thing was fairly new, you know. Companies weren't getting together or coming up with these sort of ideas to any great degree, and they've tried the best here, probably with what is limited tech. You know, much like you come back to this, if it was on, say, a PC, they've probably done a lot of things differently. But again, for the time on the Amiga, they've done fairly well. And despite all its problems, I cannot hate this game. It just has something special. Even to this day, it just has something special to it, and it's well worth picking up. So, you can probably go on eBay and the like and try and pick it up. I think it's quite expensive now on disc, to be honest, though. But, I mean, I'm playing it on the Go Tech with its 4 discs. The loading times aren't too bad. You get the odd bit between some rooms where it does a fair bit of loading. But again, for the time, it's quite acceptable and it's not a huge pain. So yeah, this is going to be quite a struggle, I think, as we go through live, because so I just seem to be picking games that I really like and will recommend. Yeah, this is definitely a game with problems, but I'll still recommend it, and I think it's worth digging into, picking up a copy, and at the very least, make sure you get a copy of the manual and the Diary of a Madman off the internet, because it adds to that atmosphere. You want to be drawn into this, so go out there, guys, and enjoy it. As always, thanks for listening, and please look forward to another episode soon.